Hi, I'm Lesley from The Beck and welcome to today's video. It is part 2 of my reading series. So today's video is all about how to successfully do guided reading in your classroom. Now, I know when I say the words guided reading, so many teachers out there get this fear of dread come over you and your heart starts to beat just a little bit faster. Guided reading is not that scary and it can be so effective for students when it's done really well. So here are my top tips for you to make sure guided reading is successful and effective for your kids in your classroom. So let's get started. So guided reading is the place in your reading program where students get to practice the things that you've taught them, whether it's a phonics skill, a decoding skill, a comprehension skill, whatever is your focus during your explicit reading teaching time. Guided reading is often one of those things that does get left out of the program because it can be very overwhelming for teachers to do. But guided reading is so important to developing young readers because it's a place where they get to practice and hone the skills that you're teaching them while you're there to guide them. You cannot underestimate the importance of a good guided reading program in your classroom. So to start with, here are my top tips for guided reading success. Guided reading is purely for practicing and consolidating the things that you have already taught them. Don't stress yourself by trying to teach new concepts in this time. Mix up your student reading levels when you're grouping them. In saying this, don't put your lowest students with your highest students, but try to put some of your low ones with some of your mid ones and your mid ones with some of your high ones. 6 in a group is plenty. Any more than this and it just becomes unmanageable. Try to use a text that's relevant to a topic that you're teaching if you can. You don't always have to use the guided reading sets from the library. Try and find something online that relates to a history or a science topic that you're currently doing. Have a prop, a sign, or a symbolic gesture to show students, I'm not to be interrupted during this time. A friend I work with uses a red sequined hat, and she puts it on anytime she's conferencing or working with students and doesn't want to be interrupted. And it works beautifully. Students are reading independently to themselves. They're not reading out loud to each other and taking it in turns, because whoever is listening has stopped learning. Give students a little mini whiteboard that they can use to write notes on while they're reading. Students actually have lots of things they want to discuss at the end, but usually it takes so long to get to the discussion that they've forgotten what they wanted to say. Also give students little sticky notes where they can mark places of interest or maybe a place they used a goal, places where they had some trouble and would like some help, or to remind them when to stop reading. When you are ready for your discussion, have some sentence starter prompts sitting on the table, and this will give students prompts to help get the discussion flowing. And last of all, don't stress about finishing the text, because often you won't, and that's okay. So those are my quick top tips to get you started. Now let's have a closer look at the structure of guided reading and how it works. Let's have a look at how to set up your groups. So it's really important when you create your groups for guided reading that you don't put kids who are working on the same level of reading in the same group. And this is why. Think back to when we talked to students about their growth mindset skills. When you get stuck on something, have a look at what other kids are doing and try the things that they are. But if you've always got kids on the same reading levels in the same groups, they're not going to be able to see the strategies that you want them to try. If you have students with some mixed abilities within the groups, you've always got some students that are able to learn from others, and then you have some students who are able to be the role models and teach the others. So it's really important to mix up the levels in your groups so that students can see what they're aiming for, and that will enable them to reach their next step of reading. So here's how I like to structure my groups. So once you get to know your readers, sort them into 5 different groups. 1 being your really low group, 3 being your kind of middle group, 5 being your high flyers. And then you can make 2 middle groups, 2 and 4, 2 being students who are not super low but are not really quite at the middle standard yet. And then group 4, which are students who are better than average but not quite at the high flyers stage yet. Then I like to make groups with a little bit of a mix of students from groups 1, 2 and 3, students from groups 2, 3 and 4, and then students from groups 3, 4 and 5. And then I mix up my groups either once or twice a term so that all students have the opportunity to either be the learner in the group or the teacher in the group. So what should you prepare when you're getting ready for guided reading? I like to do my guided reading at one of those round kidney-shaped tables. That way you have really good access to all your students and are able to hear them easily. Next, every student must have a copy of the text and also one for yourself, and if you can, have a quick look at it so you know what's coming. Each student needs a whiteboard and some markers. Make sure the markers work. Each student needs to have a copy of their goals. I like to write my kids' goals on a bookmark so they always have it with them. Make sure you have a large collection of post-it notes in the middle of the table that the children can use. Make sure you have some sentence prompts that you can use at the end to help prompt some discussion. And lastly, make sure you have some sort of a template where you can keep assessment notes of all the things that you notice about your kids. So what should we read? Like I said before, it doesn't have to be those actual guided reading sets from the library. The best kind of text you want to read is something that relates to something that you're already teaching, because that way it's meaningful for the students, they have some context around it, and it'll actually help them understand the thing that you're teaching them. So you can find something online and print it off, you can grab some other novels from the library and photocopy some pages, you can grab some non-fiction books from the library and photocopy some of those pages. Honestly, it can be anything. Now let's look at the process before we read. So when you start your guided reading, you always want to explain the focus of the session. What are we practicing today? What have we learnt in class, which we are now going to practice as a small group? You always start with a book walkthrough. The book walkthrough encompasses predicting, so looking at the book itself, the pictures, the title, and talk about what kind of a text is it? What are we going to learn from it? Think about what we already know about the text. Maybe we know something about the topic, the author, the story, and then set them a task. For example, after you read, I will be asking you about a connection that you've made to the text. Please write it on your whiteboard. And lastly, make sure you set them a place to stop reading. If you need, put a little sticky note where they need to stop so that they can remember. Next, what happens during reading? So it's now time for your students to start reading. So the most important thing to remember is the students are reading by themselves in their heads at their own pace. The reason why the students don't read aloud to each other one by one is that the students who are not reading have actually switched off and stopped learning. And the ones that are reading can get a little bit anxious and freak out and not actually take in any of the text that they're learning or any of the goals that they're trying to achieve. The sticky notes that you placed in the middle of the table, the students can use these to put on the text anywhere where they have used a reading goal, achieved learning intention, or found a tricky word that they want to ask you about later. They can record the notes on their mini whiteboard that you've given them about the learning focus, ideas, opinions, questions, because as I said before, it takes a while to get to the discussion point and often they've forgotten the things that they wanted to say. Now, while the students are reading, teachers, it's your job to ask each student to read quietly out loud to you, just for 30 seconds to a minute. While you're listening to them, record down any notes of the skills that you have observed on your assessment template. Do some small teaching where it's necessary, but keep the one learning goal in mind that you set at the beginning and don't get caught up and stress yourself out by trying to fix everything. And lastly, use lots of positives to keep those students engaged. And what happens after reading? After reading, check in with all your students and give them all an opportunity to share the ideas, questions, opinions, anything that they wrote down on their whiteboards which they want to share. Use student prompts that you have written down to support conversations and to help them start their discussions. Check in with any student who used a reading goal and marked it with a post-it note, and also any student who marked a tricky bit with a post-it note, and help them by eliciting some problem-solving skills of how to get around the tricky bits. And lastly, make any more notes on your assessment sheet that you notice regarding their comprehension skills and their ability to talk about the text that they read. If you have time, continue this cycle over again, reading another section of the text. If not, don't worry. If you don't finish, that's okay. For guided reading, quality is always better than quantity. All right, so the biggest question I get asked around guided reading is, so while I'm guided reading with the kids, what is the rest of the class doing? It's a fair question. Here are my top tips for you. Number 1. Less worksheets equals less marking. So try some activities that are a little bit more game-based or maybe even digital-based. Number 2, create some generic activities that can be used for any kind of text that you can have ready to go. Number 3, don't over-plan and have too many things and then get frustrated when kids either don't know what to do or don't finish them. 4, mixed ability groups are okay. Maybe pair up some stronger students with some less stronger students. Number 5, consider letting students move between activities. Maybe you could provide like a must-do list and a can-do list if you're finished. But my absolute favorite resource when it comes to guided reading and just reading in general, The Reading Book by Sheena Cameron and Louise Dempsey. This book is my absolute Bible. It is filled with pages of activities that kids can do independently, maybe while you're guided reading or maybe while you're doing something else, plus a million other things to support your reading program. If you buy one book as a teacher, make it this one. Can you see all my post-it notes in there of pages I have marked? That is just how often I use this book. And that brings us to the end of today's video about guided reading. I really hope you found it useful. I have found lots of those things work really well in my classroom, but as with everything, you do have to test, try things again, and change them around to suit your learners because every learner is different. Don't forget to check out my other 2 videos in this series. Part 1 was how to create just a general balanced reading program, and part 3 is all about book club. Find those links in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and press the little alarm bell so you never miss a new video. Leave me some comments down below and let me know how this worked and what other great tips that you've got as well that you can share with everyone. Please feel free to share this with all your teacher friends. Thanks for watching and have an awesome day.